All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Matoka Welch. I am the Program Director for the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program at SNHU, and I'm very excited to be moderating this very important conversation with some of my colleagues that I enjoy working with and absolutely adore. Also with another member of the Diversity Council with me, Alexandra Bangs. And so today we're going to be talking about the pandemic within. We want to thank the Diversity Council for hosting this event because it is timely and it is important. And so with that said, I'm going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about why this topic is important to them. And we will start with Dr. Christian Dean.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christian Dean. I'm a clinical faculty member in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program here at Southern New Hampshire University. I have a part-time practice I see some clients at and been a clinician for quite a while. I've really working with clients and just having friends and families, members who, of course, in general with neurodiversity, but in particular these days with the COVID-19 situation. It's sometimes heartbreaking to hear some stories. And so I really feel passionate about wanting to help folks out, and no matter who they are. So that's why I'm here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Christian. Allie?
Hi, everyone. I am Allie Bangs, and I work in the admission department. This topic has been always really important to me just because I've heard so many different things with stress levels being extremely high, especially with everything happening now and everyone working from home. So I feel like it's really important for people to understand how they can kind of overcome these challenges. So that's why I'm part of this.
Thank you. Damien, Dr. Cummins.
Hi, everyone. My name's Damien Cummins, and I am a full-time faculty in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program. And this topic is really important to me for a lot of reasons, but one being an educator and also a clinician is the fact that the way that I work and the way that I do my clinical practice is really kind of searching and seeking for that unknown and what's not really brought to the attention of others, and a lot of things that aren't a lot of people aren't aware of. And I think that really kind of goes hand in hand with diversity, neurodiversity, the pandemic, and a lot of what people struggle with emotionally, kind of isolated and maybe feeling alone. And I think that's a great opportunity and time for a panelist like us to kind of bring maybe some normalization and a different way of viewing this, and hopefully something to help you. So thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Dr. Spiro?
Hello, everyone. My name is Lube Spiro, and I am the Counseling Field Experience Manager in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program. This topic is important to me because, one, it's happening right now, and many people need support, and we are agents of that. We are trained to support individuals that have this need. We have, specialized training that we can offer persons across the board, and that is what we're equipped to do. So that is very significant to me as a professional and on a personal level, because it just doesn't stop, with the work that we do. It bleeds over into our personal lives as well. So it's about what is happening and what's relevant to our communities today. So that's why it's very important to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lube. And saving the best for last, or last but not least, Dr. Dempster.
Hi, my name is Darlene Dempster. I'm also with the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program as a full-time faculty member, and I was a counselor for 20 years, mostly with college students. I sat with many people in my office that were going through difficulty and crisis situations, and so sitting with a person who's going through difficulty and trying to be trying to help that person to find calm is something that's important to me. I also have a child who is neurodivergent. So it's important to me both for my former clients, and then, to make ties between what's happening now and what people who are neurodivergent face every day. And so trying to make those connections so that maybe we can use, all of us here can use this experience as a way to make changes in our world, to make it a more welcoming place for many different ways of thinking and being.
Thank you. So before we get started, I wanted to share some things with our participants. First, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. We were very fortunate to get your questions to the Diversity Council email address. And in the course of the panel, if there are questions that you have, this is the place where you would write those questions, and that way we can sort of disentangle it from the chat. One of the things I did see come up in the chat, yes, all the participants are muted. So we can use the Q&A tool while we are doing the panel, and there may be time at the end for more open questions if the mics are open at that point. So with that being said, I wanted to give this question to our panelists. Someone wrote, with everything that's going on, people are feeling overwhelmed, anxious, angry, and afraid. From a mental health perspective, what are some things that people can do now to cope with these conflicting emotions? And so we'll start it off with Dr. Christian.
So that's a great question. And I'll tell y'all, I'm a huge believer in physical activity just to help with overall mental health, wellness, and it's, if possible, any kind of taking a walk or just, moving your arms around, anything anyone can do, and scheduling that on a regular basis. I think it's a kind of a priority aspect in my opinion, whatever anyone is able to do for those that are able to do that. I will tell you, there's this concept called mental priming, which most of you have probably heard about. So I'll give you an example. If I'm, they just had the NFL draft, right? So if I'm a wide receiver and the ball's thrown to me and I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to drop the ball, I'm going to drop the ball, I'm going to drop the ball. More likely than not, what's going to happen? I'm going to drop the ball. If I tell myself, don't drop the ball, don't drop the ball, don't drop the ball, more likely than not, what's going to happen? I'm going to drop the ball, because the operant word there is drop. So sometimes what I believe is helpful is changing the script in my mind, right? So if I'm waking up and I'm telling myself I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I can't handle this, then unfortunately, more likely than not, my mind's going to lead me to that emotional state, and I'm going to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to feel like I can't handle it. So part of it is restructuring the scripts in my mind. And I encourage folks to write it out, right? Because sometimes it's hard to, if I envision sharks in my mind that are these, if you will, negative thoughts, it's hard to overcome them. But by writing them down and writing down positive scripts, I can handle this. Remember, just one thing at a time. Take your time. No one's perfect, right? And just reminding myself of that on a regular basis, even if it's every hour, just taking 2 minutes to reread that script, I think can potentially reprogram my mind, if you will, to focusing on, okay, what can I do with my energy right now, right? Because worrying about it isn't going to help anything. If I can't control it, being anxious about it or being upset about it isn't going to change anything. What can I do that is helpful for me and my family? Because all these other things that's going on in the world, if I have no control over it, I'd rather spend my money, my energy, what I call my emotional money, on things that can give me a positive return versus putting it into something that it's just going to drain me and actually probably give me more of a negative return. So get into a habit of changing that, and not only now, but hopefully beyond this pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you. Allie?
Yeah, so for me, being someone that does get overwhelmed pretty easily in some instances, I found that self-care is extremely important, because if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of your families. You're not going to be able to take care of what you need to do at work. So I too am very big on writing things down. So when I feel a little overwhelmed, I write it down. I make it plain for myself to create that positive habit. It's really important to kind of set a schedule for yourself. So waking up, if you drink coffee, get your breakfast, really kind of restructuring your mind so that you're more on a positive note rather than the negative notes, and really just being able to if you're able to follow those guidelines. I feel that I have found that it's helped me throughout the weeks, especially with working from home and, also having family that you have to kind of take care of too, because they're home as well. So yeah, I'm very big on self-care. Get exercise too. It's going to clear a lot of things in your mind as well.
Thank you. Damien.
Yeah, so I found it kind of interesting in listening to Dr. Dean, because I think in our approach to counseling, we all kind of have our own philosophy and our own direction in the way that we try to help our clients, and also ourselves. So the way that Dr. Dean was talking is very cognitive focused, and I tend to embrace and try to help people more in an emotional capacity. And so when I hear people talking about these overwhelming emotions of maybe anger, fear, sadness, anxiety, and everything like that, what I try to do is help people to understand that their feelings are valid, they're normal, and to not discount or to try to push away those emotions, because I think the more that we try to stuff those emotions, the more that we try to brush those emotions under the rug, the more they're going to try and come out. So I don't have like a single solution or a go-to for individuals to try and work on, or what to do. I think it's very personal. I think it's very subjective of what may work for me, may not work for you. And so I think it really kind of boils down to kind of having a metaphorical toolbox of different skills, different ways and things that have helped maybe in your own past, recognizing times in your own past of when you experienced something that was traumatic or difficult or overwhelming, or you had some of these similar emotions. What worked then, what did not work, and how can you incorporate maybe a piece of that into this? Because maybe what I'm doing works for me, but it may not work for you. And so really kind of tapping in to your own potential and recognizing kind of what Ali was talking about, having good self-care skills. And if maybe writing things down works for you, wonderful, keep on that. But also, I mean, try and recognize that there are other alternatives out there, as far as having a strong support network, having availability to find that safe space for you, to where that you can get away from some of this. I know there's a lot of kind of this loop and repeat of kind of what we hear and what we see on TV and everything. And so finding a way to disconnect from that, I think, is very important. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Dr. Spiro.
I echo a lot of what's been said, and specifically what Damien just mentioned about allowing yourself the space really to honor what you're experiencing, and spending time with that emotion, that it's real, and not punishing yourself or shaming yourself or, feeling like I shouldn't be feeling like this. I should be able to handle this. Being realistic about the experience. A lot of times I would tell my clients, you got to give it 20 minutes. Give that feeling 20 minutes. Experience it for 20 minutes intensely, and then allow yourself the space to let it go. I have found that advice to be extremely helpful because sometimes you'll be overwhelmed by those feelings and the lack of control that you experience. Normalizing it and sharing that with others helps tremendously, whether it be your therapist or another friend or family member, but truly giving yourself that space. And like Dr. Cummings said, there isn't one activity or strategy that'll work for everybody, but finding what it is that works for you and doing it, and doing it consistently, I think you will notice a change in those feelings of anxiety and stress that you may feel. But the key there is consistency, creating a support network so that you can be held accountable for those changes you choose to implement. One really cool thing I kind of discovered, I know all of us are probably doing a whole bunch of cleaning during this time. I've been unpacking stuff and packing stuff up. I came across a bunch of stationery. So instead of emailing people now, I'm just writing folks that I really care about letters. And I'm like, isn't that something cool that they can get, you know, in the mail, instead of an email or, you know, a Zoom or whatever. It's just a letter. It's something kind of antiquated, but I think it's just kind of cool. But finding that activity for yourself and enjoying it.
Thank you, Dr. Spiro and Dr. Dempster.
Yes, I am also going to piggyback off of what both Dr. Cummings and Dr. Spiro were saying in terms of normalizing the feelings. I think a big part is first identifying what are you feeling, because sometimes what you do in response to cope with a difficult feeling might vary. Are you frustrated? Are you lonely? Are you grieving? Are you bored? Are you overwhelmed? Then when you're trying to determine how will I cope with these current feelings, think about what has worked for you in the past. So for example, if I'm frustrated or angry, walking and using up that energy that I have is helpful. That works for me. Now for somebody else, something different might work. Listening to some rockin' music or some hardcore music or something, or maybe a calming activity might help some people when they're angry. If you're sad or lonely or feeling isolated, you know, maybe something more calming or peaceful, or, you know, it's gonna again vary, just like Dr. Spiro and Dr. Cummings were saying. It's going to vary because we're all individuals and we all need different things to keep us calm. So I agree with a lot of the suggestions, focusing on those things that we can control. There are things we can control and things we can't control, but focusing on those things that we can control, such as taking care of our bodies through eating, sleep, exercise. I agree with taking breaks from social media and from the news at times, and just accessing our support system, those kinds of things.
Thank you. Those were wonderful suggestions. I know for myself, I like to engage in self-care, and I have mantras. And one of the mantras I repeat to myself is, I can do hard things. You know, just reminding myself of how I've overcome difficult situations in the past. And that's my mantra in this situation. So a few of our questions, well, many were a bit thematic, and the theme being, everyone is at home, what can I do? And so, and also we did receive a question, and I acknowledge your question in the Q&A, and we will get to that because it's part of this, everyone's at home, what do I do, sort of in this sort of theme area. One question, and I think a lot of individuals might be struggling with this in silence, I don't think my marriage/relationship is going to survive this quarantine. How can I keep a level head when everything is so overwhelming? Dr. Dean, did you want to start us off?
Sure. So from my perspective, I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I work a lot with couples and families. And I will tell you that if I treat my partner, my spouse as the enemy, we're really going to have a hard time, right? I ask couples this all the time: what's the number one cause of breakups and divorce? And they'll say money, infidelity, gambling, drugs. I think it's selfishness at the core, and I think it manifests in different ways for different people. I think it's hard to be a happy us if I'm focused on being a happy me. So my invitation to couples is to be selfless. Well, now this only works if both of y'all do it, right? But to really just shower your partner, your spouse with love, and be giving and give that selflessness, and hopefully they will do the same thing. But it's about working together, not against each other. And if we don't change that mentality, in my opinion, it just provides an environment where it's, every person for themselves. And I just don't think that that's healthy. So in particular, with all the stressors going on, right? Who's going to take care of the kids? Whose job's more important? And sometimes that means you sit down and you got to learn to compromise. And 3 ways to compromise: you meet in the middle, there's a middle, you take turns if there's no middle, or you choose a third alternative. And sometimes to taking turns, you flip a coin. And if you didn't win the coin toss this time, next time there's a impasse, whoever lost the coin toss gets their way. So just really trying to figure out ways to work together versus not working against each other.
Thank you. Allie?
So I've actually had a lot of friends and family experiencing a struggle similar to this in regard to being home. And sometimes I hear them say like, oh, they're just around all the time. I just need to get away and I can't leave the house or I can't do these things. And I usually just let them know like there's other ways that you can mentally take a break without having to, leave the house. You could have a phone conversation with a friend or talk to other family members, maybe FaceTime. They have these amazing apps where you can play games with family members through like video, and it just gives you that time away without being away. And then it gives you time to kind of get yourself together to be able to have those conversations that might need to be had and finding that work-life balance. What I also found is amazing is that SNHU has offered time for your families. They've offered time that if you need to kind of take a mental break from work to be able to get things situated at home, you absolutely can do that. And all you have to do is just request for it. So I think that would be really useful in times where people are struggling with marriages or families.
Thank you, Allie. Dr. Cummins?
I think this is a wonderful question and something that's extremely relevant, especially right now. The way that I see this, and this is coming from a personal and professional perspective, is that in any relationship, there are going to be themes, kind of patterns, and the way that people kind of develop this almost kind of song and dance routine, the way that they function, the way that they interact, and the way they communicate and everything. And I think it's really important to find out what parts of those are healthy, helpful, conducive, and reciprocal. And then how do you replicate that? And in any and every relationship that people are going to be in, there are going to be some challenging and some difficult times. And so historically, reflecting back, looking at some of those times that were difficult and how those were overcome, and to adjust and adapt, because I think in a relationship, finding ways to adapt is huge, because if you can't focus on something and recognize a challenge that you're facing and be able to do that in line with your partner, then a lot of times it's going to draw a divide between you. And I see that, and probably even more so now, because people are having to stay at home. They're not able to get out, and the domestic violence rate is huge and is increasing because people don't have an outlet. They don't have a resource or way to get out a lot of times. And because of that, there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of people becoming overwhelmed, and they don't know how to handle it. They don't know what to do with those emotions. And then when friction starts or some kind of issue between a couple happens, then it turns into something that in a normal situation, somebody could have easily just walked away, gone to a friend's house or done something like that, but they can't now. So it's finding those opportunities and finding those ways maybe from the past or what is working currently, and how to expand on that, how to bridge that gap for when those times are challenging, when they're going to be difficult, and having that opportunity to kind of part or have that space for yourself. Because I know for me personally, for me to recharge my batteries, I need to be alone. I need some opportunity to be away from not just my wife or my kids, but period, just to have that kind of recharge opportunity in that moment. And so my wife recognizes that, my kids recognize that. And so having that understood, having that accepted, I think is very important. And to communicate that's really big too.
Thank you. Dr. Spiro.
The other thing that many folks can consider, and really should consider if they're in that place where things are just getting that bad, telehealth services are available. You can still connect with a therapist. And if it is something you can do, I would strongly encourage you to do it. Find the time and space to engage in that therapy with the therapist. But also getting connected to different types of support groups that may be available online. Sometimes just hearing that someone else is having a similar story, again, normalizing the experience, can help you gain some perspective. Utilizing those resources, I think, can help many families and couples adjust and address some of the issues that they may be experiencing in this, unprecedented time. But those resources are out there. I encourage you to seek them out and see how they work for you on an individual level, on a familial level, and even as a couple. And I've referred quite a few people to different types of services, and people don't know what they don't know, and they sometimes just don't know it's that readily available. And now therapists are, depending on where you're at and what kind of services, there's lots of flexibility at time. You could do a session at 10 p.m. at night because there's a therapist in another time zone that'll be available to do that for you. So if it's, the children are around, definitely look into that. And if you don't know where to start, like, how do I get this information? Connect with, the insurance companies or other therapists that you may know that could potentially refer you to someone. But I think it's a real practical resource that many people may just not know how readily available it's becoming.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Dempster.
Yes. So it's really important, kind of piggybacking off of what Dr. Dean was saying, work on being polite with each other. Small acts of kindness and consideration can go a long way. Would you like a glass of water if you're going into the kitchen? Or I love you before going to bed. Little things like that can go a long way. Conversely, one zinger or snarky comment can really take a couple back a long way. So sometimes showing restraint, going in the other room, going on a walk to get out of the house if you're feeling angry, and you'll find over time that it'll kind of settle down, those feelings of anger, to manageable levels, and talk about it once it's kind of settled down. There's this simple concept called the love bank, in which you can make, and this is it was in a book by Notorious and Markman. I'm not sure if they're the ones that came up with the concept, but you want to make more deposits in your relationship than withdrawals. Just to go back to, if a person is in an abusive relationship during this time, then it's really important to have a safety plan. So I would encourage calling the domestic violence hotline just to get some ideas about resources, and try to do that in a private location. It's 1-800-899-SAFE.
Thank you so much for all of you, for these resources and these tips. And you're right, this is something that's very real for all of us right now. This next question, we've seen variations of it, and so I know there have been some in the Q&A box too. To put it simply, I am struggling. I find it difficult to get my work done, teach my children their school subjects, and maintain the house. I feel like I'm failing in all areas. So the first part of this question is, what can I do to find some balance? What recommendations do you all have for staff who have kids at home? How do I reset myself in regard to parenting and being at home all the time now? So it's a three-parter. Tackle it as you may, Dr. Dean.
So that's a lot. So Thomas Sowell's brilliant American economist, I'm going to paraphrase his definition of economics, is the study of scarce resources that have alternative uses. Time is the one scarce resource that unfortunately we cannot create more of. So it's really, in my opinion, scheduling out and having a very dedicated schedule of time of when you're going to do things. Now, I'm not saying be militant about it, right? That you can have some flexibility and some self-compassion for yourself and for your family members. But to have some kind of structure as much as possible and to try to stick to that. I think children thrive on structure. I believe a lot of adults thrive on structure as well. And children are used to that at school. So trying to recreate, okay, we're going to get up at this time, and try to have some sense of structure for your children and yourself. And with that, finding crafts or certain times for them to be engaged in things that you can then hopefully focus on work, but also spending time with your children, quality time, because sometimes if they're at home, in my opinion, they'll come seeking us out because they just want to connect with us. And at the end of the day, our children, I believe, want a relationship with us. So making sure we dedicate some time for that as well.
Thank you. Allie?
I can relate to this because I have kids, and working from home is easier when you don't have to also homeschool. So it can be a little bit challenging, especially because my kids are younger in elementary school, so that they ask a lot of questions, they need a lot of help, and it can be really, really stressful. Again, I'm going to go right back to that SNHU time. I have been able to take like a couple hours of SNHU time to be able to focus on my kids' homework without having to use PTO, and be able to help them while they are in school. It's, again, a great resource to be able to help with that balance a little bit. But really, again, having a schedule, really kind of structuring, okay, and tell your kids your schedule. Like, this is when we need to get your work done. This is when I have to get my work done. I find that having that balance and kids being understanding of that would be really helpful for families and parents in general working.
Thank you. Dr. Cummins?
So I'm going to quote our esteemed director of our program, Mark Wilson. So whenever we talk about balance, he always talks about there never is truly a real balance to anything. It's really negotiating that time. And what he means and what I mean by that is that there's never an opportunity in time in most people's lives where everything is truly balanced, where maybe your household is balanced, everything is clean, your kids are taken care of, appropriately fed, and your schoolwork has been done, you've managed your own self-care, taking care of your spouse or significant other equally in all a balanced time. And so with all that being said, something's going to be neglected at some point. Not everything is going to be focused on 100%. And so a lot of times it's just doing the best you can with what you've got, and taking those opportunities and really focusing on what the priorities are for that day. And the normal that you had before is not the normal that you have today. And so really kind of making sure that there's something that can be consistent and reliable in your world that you have control over, so that it doesn't get out of sorts. And there's something called the, I think it's the spoon theory. And it's when you wake up in the morning, you only have so many spoons to give out. And throughout your day, you may give some to your kids and their schoolwork. You may give some to your spouse and supporting your spouse. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have spoons left over for yourself. And if you're giving out spoons to everyone and you don't have any left to give, then you don't have enough for yourself. So just remember to always make sure that you save enough spoons for yourself, because you can't always make new spoons.
Thank you. That's quite an image. And it makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Damien. Dr. Spiro.
Sorry, y'all, there's a phone going back in the background. What I want to emphasize that others have already emphasized is the structure and the routine. I think that's critical when you have a family at home and you're working from home, and there's a whole change that's occurred. Their structure and their routine helps things become predictable for the children, because it's very unpredictable for them right now, which then creates some sense of calm. I think that's extremely critical, but also exercise that for yourself too. Stick to that structure you create for yourself. And then being open and honest, having conversations, answering questions honestly, and being open to anything that the children may, bring to the forefront, because they need that. They need that reassurance, which I think could ease some of the angst that's being felt. But then there also has to be room for play, lots of it. Playtime might start at noon and go to 2 o'clock. There's, I think we all have some level of flexibility right now, but that needs to be incorporated regularly, those routines. But even adult play, you got to have fun too. So,
thank you. And Dr. Dempster.
Yes, I can certainly relate. I have 2 children at home. One thing that has been helpful for me is to communicate. For example, communicating with teachers, perhaps, to come up with a workable compromise. If the amount of schoolwork that's coming home is overwhelming, I communicated with my teachers, and we were able to find an amount of schoolwork that was manageable on top of the job. Another thing that's difficult, it's been difficult for me, is to try to lower internal standards of perfection. So usually what I do in my mind around that is to try to think, what would another reasonable person do? Not me. What would another reasonable person do? And try to stop at what that other person would stop at, so that I can learn to stop myself from putting too much pressure on myself for things to be perfect. Sometimes it's helpful to divide work into chunks. So for example, if I have a lot of papers to grade that week, 30 papers, and I think how many I don't want to work on this particular day, then 30 divided by however many days. And it's a lot less overwhelming to do 3 to 5 papers a day than it is to grade 20 papers a day, if that makes sense. And then there's the eat the frog method. If your job is to eat a frog, eat it first thing in the morning. If your job is to eat 2 frogs, eat the biggest frog first. So kind of get over with the stuff that you're dreading and not wanting to do. And then you're kind of on the downward slide for the rest of the day.
Well, thank you. I've heard of kissing a frog and eating it too. All right, this question just came up in the Q&A, and I think this is also what many of us are managing right now. What do you suggest for those of us that live alone and cannot have human contact? I found that it's almost starting to hurt physically not to be around other people. How can we work through this? Dr. Dean?
I might get fired for saying this. If you live alone and you need physical contact, I think sometimes the question is about risk reduction. And this is just Christian Dean's perspective. If I need contact and I'm living alone, I don't know what's worse, to, contact a friend or family member, say, hey, make sure you showered, they're sanitized. Hey, can I come over and have a hug? And then, I'll go home and take another shower. I mean, I think sometimes mitigating risk to not have other consequences may be a better option, but that's an individual decision everybody's got to make. But I know folks like that, and for them, they sometimes say, hey, look, I'm going to go over to a family member's house and I'm going to give them a hug and hang out, and I'm going to leave. And to them, that the benefit of that outweighs the potential risk in mind. Otherwise, they're just, the agony of suffering alone is overwhelming. So my invitation to folks would be to really look at yourselves and make that decision as to, what do you think would be the less negative consequence for you in that perspective.
All right, Allie?
Yeah, I feel very similar in many of the same ways. It really boils down to self-care at that point, because if you don't feel useful within yourself and you're feeling too overwhelmed and you need something, then you're going to have to do what it is that you need so that you can be able to function throughout your days. And it can be a struggle for a lot of people, dealing with that and having to sit alone or having to work alone. And if FaceTiming or using all those other resources, you still have that feeling, then I agree, you would have to kind of weigh the lesser of the evils for you and kind of be like, okay, this is what I need right now in order to be able to continue through this for however long it's going to go.
All right. Dr. Cummins?
Yeah, so I think this is a very normal feeling and a reaction for a lot of people because even if you are with family members or living at home or with them or whatever, there's still a lot of isolation. There's still a lot of people feeling alone from what maybe they normally did and how social they were before. And I think because I'm such an optimist, I think that this is a wonderful opportunity for people to kind of be creative, to learn new and different ways to connect, to feel less alone. Because I mean, similar to what Dr. Spiro was talking about earlier, I mean, you may dig in your closet and find something that you didn't even know was there, and it'd be stationary that you can try to connect with someone that you didn't before. And there's so many different virtual connections and ways that people can use to connect with others. And I think it's really kind of boils down to being simplistic, but also technologically minded as well, because I mean, the forms and ways that maybe we communicated, socialized, and things that we did before are not available to us. They're not out there to where we can easily access them. So it's trying to find an alternative to that. And I know too that with people suffering with clinical depression or things like that, it can exacerbate it and make it even that much more difficult to try and get out. But it's searching and finding that courage, finding that part of you that wants that to seek help, and asking for that. And also recognizing too that there are resources, whether it's telehealth or some form of reaching out to a doctor or helpline or crisis hotline to ask for that help as well.
Thank you. And we certainly did get a question about depression, so that's good advice. Dr. Spiro?
I don't have anything additional to share, except that maybe you can't get the hug, but you can set up I don't know, walk in the park 6 feet away from each other, just to have that human contact. But I also agree with what Christian said. If that is what you need and you're making a judgment, call for yourself, and you have someone that'll give you that hug, then that may be what you may need if it's a possibility. It varies so much for us and how we can get that need met. I'm a very social person. I can't stand this, but I have a very good friend of mine. We make sure that, we get to the park, and we do the distance, but at least we're seeing each other and hanging out. I mean, it's some level of, normal, a different type of normal. But that's a choice I make for myself, and that's what works for me. And you have to find what that is for you and be okay with it.
Thank you. And Dr. Dempster?
Yes, I would share that that even if we can't have the physical intimacy, then maybe going deeper emotionally. First of all, don't hesitate to reach out to other people, even if you think they have a family and you might be disturbing them, because many people would love to talk to somebody different other than the people that they're talking to all the time. And then we have the choice to go deeper. Sometimes we just stay on the surface with conversations and don't disclose and don't talk about painful experiences, or like share your deepest, like what was it really like in high school. Like you can start to have some really deep emotional conversations that can sometimes really be satisfactory. If you are the kind of person that needs physical touch, I mean, we all need physical touch, but if this is driving you crazy, I mean, sometimes the touch of an animal, and there are a lot of animals that are in need of homes, so maybe that could be a solution for you. But I do also agree with Dr. Dean and with others who've said that if that's what you've got to do, that of course consider the risk. Maybe choosing somebody who's younger and who doesn't have, who isn't in constant contact with somebody. I consult with a medical professional perhaps, or make sure that this is a low risk person. But if you need to connect with someone and it has to be physical touch, then do what you need to do to take care of yourself.
I appreciate all of these responses. I know myself, I have older parents who are in a very in a group with health needs too, and so I've been actually quite afraid of interacting with them because I don't want to be someone who's asymptomatic and inadvertently exposing them. And so these are very real recommendations for people who want sometimes to maintain and perhaps medically cannot be close to others, or depending on where you are regionally, there's no one around that you can connect with. And so I really appreciate that advice, Dr. Dempster. I recognize too that we have about 13 minutes left and we haven't spoken to neurodiversity yet. And so I definitely want to get one of those questions in. But I wanted to also let everyone know who's attending that we will have a part 2 of this discussion. And so if you have any questions that were not answered today, please don't hesitate to send those to the diversity email address. And there will be surveys sent out for part 2. So make sure that you include, any feedback there that could be relevant to the panel and or to the Diversity Council so that we can address whatever, topics that you would like as it pertains to this. So this will be our last question, just so we have a little bit of time if there are questions at the end. The name of this panel is called The Pandemic Within. How might the experience of this pandemic be similar to the struggles of people who are neurodivergent, the struggles that they face every day? And so that can be the question that we ask. And I think some of you have already spoken to your experiences with neurodiversity, but how can we relate this experience that some people face every day, and how can we create a more tolerant work environment? Dr. Dean.
So the concept of, so one of the questions was about in the Q&A about depression, right? So the same concept that if someone is feeling alone and disconnected, right, and going through the time that we're all going through right now, and a lot of us feeling alone and disconnected. So to consider how feeling this way for a prolonged period of time, years possibly, right? Or for some people, decades, gives us maybe a window into how challenging this can be. And, depending on the neurodivergent situation that individual's in, whether it be, post-traumatic stress, depression, you name it. So I think it gives us a snippet of that. And this is still hard for us. And that's not to minimize how difficult this is for anybody. But I think it does give us a point of reference to how challenging neurodiversity can be for a lot of folks out there. And I hope with a working environment that we can extend grace and be understanding when someone is having a hard time, the same way we do with students, right? If a student sends me an email and says, hey, I'm having a really hard time, whatever the case may be, even if they don't have a disability accommodation, I think it's, human of me to say, hey, you need a couple of days? Sure, not a problem. They reach out. I think the least I can do is take that into consideration and respect their the courage that they displayed by coming forth and asking for some extra time. So, you're good at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dean. Yes, grace and compassion go a long way. Allie.
Yeah, I like to think of neurodiversity and mental health almost in the perspective of like a puzzle. And even in life in general, it's very similar. So, no puzzle, not every puzzle is going to be exactly the same. Some have more pieces than others. People work them differently. Some people work with edges first. Some people like to make it a little more complex and work with the middle pieces or separated by color. And, that could really represent the different ways that people are prospectively seeing things. And we have to keep in mind that for a lot of people, that puzzle went from a 30-piece puzzle to a 3,000-piece puzzle. And it got a lot more complicated. There's a lot more pieces to put together. But at the end of the day, it still creates a picture. It just may take a little bit longer. It just may need a couple more hands in order to be able to get that puzzle together. So me personally, I deal with a lot of mental health and issues, depression, anxiety. So it helps to be able to kind of take myself in different environments and be like, okay, this right now is a 30-piece puzzle to me. So I can probably get this done pretty quickly. But I might need a little bit more help in this situation where, for me, being around a lot of people creates that 3,000-piece puzzle. And so now I need someone to maybe just check in and be like, how are you doing today? What can I do to help? But not that just general, like, how are you? Some people really need that genuine, how are you doing today? How can I help you get those pieces together? So that's prospectively how I like to think how it relates to now with the pandemic and how things have changed for people.
Thank you, Allie. I love that analogy. Dr. Cummins.
Yeah, so I really appreciate Ellie's analogy as well. And so here's a metaphor that I like as well. It's the iceberg metaphor. And I think connecting neurodiversity and mental health, I think it's very much in line with this, because when we think about and look at an iceberg, there's only this small portion, this small percentage that we can see. And below that, there's this huge, huge chunk of what we don't see, what we don't know. And so being aware of this, being understanding, accepting and accommodating of that, I think is so important, because what we see and what we know is only that small percentage of what we don't. And getting to know people, getting to really understand who they are, I think is important. And from a university perspective, I mean, I think our university does a really great job of being accommodating, being inclusive. Of course, there's always challenges and things that can be improved, but the fact that we're having this panel here today, having this open discussion, I think is great, a great start to working towards being more accommodating, being more inclusive and accepting of this, and recognizing that it can be a top-down approach, but it can also be a team approach, it can be a program approach, and then it can be a 101 approach as well. And so I think that's our job, and everybody can play a part in that, in helping with this.
Thank you. Dr. Spiro.
I really do like what Allie shared too, so thank you. That was beautifully said. What really comes up for me in discussing this is that, you know, exercising kindness, exercising patience, exercising understanding and support, and, you know, being available when a person may need that, or being available for one of those things if that a person needs that, because it's an adjustment period for everyone. And when someone is already maybe managing certain things that are stressful and difficult, having this added stressor makes it even more stressful and difficult. Just remembering that. I mean, just being, for me, sometimes it's just really just about being kind, you know, and accepting the person for who they are right there in that moment, and not trying to change it, just being with that person in that moment and understanding it. I mean, those are some important qualities for me, and I think the more we can exercise that as a community, we can be more helpful.
Thank you. And Dr. Dempster.
Yes, I would share that many individuals, many former clients that I worked with felt isolated, as we do now. People with eating disorders might isolate to avoid triggering foods. People with social anxiety to avoid the anxiety, or they go and then just endure the anxiety. People who are grieving or struggling with depression might avoid social interactions to not want to be a Debbie Downer, so to say. And people on the autism spectrum, like my son, might want to connect with others but miss out on some social cues. So if we know how it feels now for us, how we feel to be isolated. So if we can remember how this feels, I think it can help to motivate us in the future. There are many different ways to be in this world. Some of us we're all different in some ways, but for some people, following rigid social rules is not doesn't allow them to survive so how can we respond in a way that will help this person to feel connected, and to be able to participate. So just kind of thinking about that and doing what we can in each moment.
Thank you, Dr. Dempster. And I actually want to thank all of the panelists today. Thank you for your wisdom, for your compassion and your insights. I'm honored to have shared space with you all. Thank you for the questions that came in. They were very insightful, and they were very realistic. And like Dr. Dempster said, we're all going through this right now. So I think we all can have a little bit more compassion going forward. I actually wanted to, in the last couple of minutes, turn this over to Dr. Jackson, to see if there were any final words from the Diversity Council as it pertains to this event.
My final thoughts is I just want to thank the panelists as well as you, Matoka, for facilitating this. This is an important topic. We will be continuing this conversation in May, so hold your calendars for May 28th as a tentative date. Know that this work is hard. It's going to definitely require for us to continue to self-reflect and practice mindfulness. And if you guys could please complete our survey, I put the link in the chat. Your feedback is extremely important for us to continue to grow and develop our programming. If you have ideas for in the future, please include that in your survey as well, because we really leverage that feedback to develop our program throughout the year. We actually brought this forum up because it was actually scheduled in July, just because there was time pressed for this topic. But overall, thank you guys for your attendance, and we look forward to helping support and continue the conversation in May. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.